Welcome to the Zelos podcast. This week I've got Josh Wludyga on the show. He is at George Gwinnett College out in Georgia, and we're going to be talking a little bit about what he's presenting at the NSCA National Conference in July, but also how he treats dancers as athletes, because of course they are, but what that means in terms of strength and conditioning when it comes to these performers. Hope you enjoy it. Oh, man. So you're in Georgia now, but I see a sticker behind you. Did you go to Arizona State? Are you a Sun Devil?
I did. I got my
Nice.
bachelor's and master's there. It's where I met Brent Alvar, the current NSCA president. He was my mentor while I was in my master's program. And then took some time off to be a practitioner and kind of thought that was what I was going to do. And then at some point it evolved into wanting to teach in higher education and decided I needed to go back to get my doctorate. And he was at Rocky Mountain University, which is kind of a hybrid program intended to allow professionals to go to school while still maintaining their full-time career. And he was director of research at the time there. So he was influential in getting me to Rocky Mountain. So him and I have been really good friends for, gosh, almost 18 years now. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So when you say you went into like a practitioner, I take it that's the private sector. Were you doing coaching, training? What were you doing?
Yeah, so my intention when I got out of school was I want to be a strength and conditioning coach. I didn't really know what capacity that would be in. The romantic version was a head strength and conditioning coach for, say, an NFL team. You know, in my naivete, didn't think about like, okay, there's 32 of those and it's heavily competitive, and guys will want to hang on to that job for as long as possible, and you know, until someone kicks them out the door. And so I had to be a little bit more realistic about what opportunities were available. And so I found a position where it was a physical therapy clinic that offered sports performance. And they had one of their big partnerships was with a local youth soccer club. And so we provided all of the speed and agility training for all the teams, from I think the 10 or 11-year-old squad all the way up to the seniors. And in addition to that, if they wanted to come into our facility for individualized training, I also had a contract that we secured with a local gymnastics facility. And so we had some gymnasts in there for a while. So it was really, you know, predominantly soccer players, but the dominant market was youth training, and it was you know, kind of all different kinds of sports. And so that's what I really started out with in this venture. But then you know, like many things, it was maybe more about where I was working rather than falling out of love with strength and conditioning. And so I ventured into other fields within health and fitness and wellness. And so I found myself working in corporate wellness for a little bit, and then eventually teaching at a personal training school while doing personal training as a side business. And then that's where that kind of evolved into, I would like to do this for the rest of my life, but that personal training school felt like a temporary position, maybe a young man's position, not something that you retire at age 65 or 70 doing. And so that's where that was kind of the motivation of, I'd like to work at a institution of higher education and probably need to get my doctorate in order to give me more opportunities for that. And so that's what kind of led me to go back to school after being out of it for, I believe, about 7 years after my master's.
Interesting, because you're giving me these underpinnings of I don't know, for lack of a better word, discontent. You know, you go with strength conditioning with the youth, you go with personal training, you start teaching personal training, but it's just not like where you're exactly wanting to be. You haven't found, although you're passionate about strength conditioning, like you say, you haven't found the place where your passion can truly flourish. So are you there now? Or are you in the transition onto something else?
Yeah, I really feel at peace with where I am right now. I'm at Georgia Gwinnett College, which is about 45 minutes outside of Atlanta, and it's predominantly a teaching college, which means there's a small expectation of being involved in research projects. But I feel like even though I've been trained in research, my strength is more to absorb the research and try to find practical application to it, rather than me coming up with my own original project and writing a publication and securing funding and all those things. So I never envisioned myself at a research one institution like Arizona State or otherwise. And so to find this opportunity and really to kind of dabble in both elements of our program. We have a clinical concentration and a health promotion concentration. So it really allows me to kind of tap into my experience and my education in trying to teach classes on sports nutrition, strength and conditioning, and that sort of thing, all the way over to changing health behaviors and corporate wellness and those types of things.
Yeah, I don't think we talk about the types of universities all that often, but you're at a teaching college from the sounds of it. It's not, like you
Yeah.
say, a research 1A. My daughter attends a university outside of Portland, which is also a teaching college, which is what kind of attracted her to the track she's on for athletic training, because the teachers are more concerned with the students and their knowledge and their learning, rather than where they're going to get grant money for a research project and have their TAs teach the classes. So that's really quite nice. So
Yeah.
teaching definitely is something. But to backtrack just a second, Josh, you mentioned gymnasts and that had drawn these young gymnasts in. Me, I guess that struck a chord because I was a competitive gymnast for several years
Mhm.
in my youth. Uh, but you don't, forgive me, but you strike me as not the gymnast body. I mean, you seem a lot larger than me, which is, it's a small guys kind of competition in sport. So how did that happen? What was the connection? Just as a side note, how did you land gymnasts with the gargantuan body that you're serving, that I'm seeing right now?
Well, first off, thank you for the best compliment I've received all year, probably, maybe even lifetime. That was fantastic. But no, I think one, it started out as the owner of the physical therapy clinic said, we need more than just this youth soccer club. I mean, they pay us a fantastic amount of money. It was a large, extremely competitive youth club in Scottsdale, Arizona, where parents were willing to pay lots of money. So it gave us a very favorable contract. But he was looking to diversify the types of athletes that we had coming in there, and we had some baseball players from the local high schools and things like that. And so I started looking around at places that were nearby, and I was attracted to this gymnastics facility. One, because it was, I think, maybe less than 10 minutes away from our facility, so they could either come to us or we go to them, kind of thing, and we would work that out. But I've always had this draw towards what I call underserved populations. And I don't know if you delved into my background a little bit, but at one point I was an exercise physiologist at a cancer center, and really that kind of reason to go in that direction. One was because that was around the time that I started my doctorate program, but it was also that looking at it, I was like, here's a group of people who would highly benefit from the types of expertise that we have. And yet there's probably very little resources poured into that type of information, or that type of ability to engage with those patients. And so that was kind of the way I was drawn into that. And so, kind of circling back to the original point with the gymnastics, was in spite of the heavy volumes of training that gymnasts undergo, and the types of things that they do, I felt like maybe there was a disconnect between the need for strength and conditioning as a supplement to what you're already doing in your training. And so that was one of the things that I was hoping to instill in this facility, was that I know that you're doing a lot, and there's a lot of things that you're probably doing that help to build strength and build explosiveness and all these things that are required of the different events that they compete in. But here's how something that I do can help in, whether it's injury prevention, whether it's in to optimize some of the physical tools that you need in order to be successful, and whatever that might be. And so I think it was an interesting experience to try to instill that with them, and it was pretty favorable for the time that I spent for them. It was fairly short. I think less than a year that I did that before moving on, but nevertheless, that was kind of the draw, was that my assumption going into speaking with them is, I doubt they're doing this right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a lot of gymnasts, it's the word's gotten out to where you see more and more that are incorporating it now, but talking almost 20 years ago, it was probably, there was a disconnect there still. You at that time probably still were favoring the traditional strength and conditioning sports like football and baseball, and maybe to a lesser extent basketball. And so I think other sports didn't really latch onto it because it maybe was never offered to them, or they never really saw, how does this benefit me? And so that's what I was trying to do, and that's what I continue to do when working with dancers now.
Yeah, which is exactly where I was going to go with this, because with your experience with the gymnast, it just makes sense. As well as we bring the cancer survivors in to the fold, and other populations that aren't football, basketball, baseball, and the like, not the mainstream sports. You have this, at least from it seems to me, you have this propensity to seek out populations that are not necessarily mainstream and introduce them to the world of strength conditioning. So you're going to be speaking about strength conditioning as it relates to dancers at the national conference for the NSCA this July. Give us a little bit of just a sneak preview as to what it is you're going to be talking about.
Sure. And so to introduce the topic, I'll basically tell the audience briefly why I'm even talking about it in the first place, which is that I assume, maybe I'm naive, but I assume that a lot of strength and conditioning coaches, when they have kids, one of the things that they think about is, whatever my kid decides to do, if I'm not proficient at coaching that actual sport or activity, maybe I can use my knowledge as a strength and conditioning coach to help them as they reach an age where I think they can grasp what the purpose is of what we're doing, and it can help them in whatever they're striving for. And I had two daughters, and I think selfishly I would have liked if they had picked something like soccer or basketball. I was a basketball player when I was in junior high and high school, and so they ended up picking dance. My wife was a dancer all her life, and they just kind of gravitated towards dance, and so now they dance competitively for our local studios dance company. So they go to regional competitions throughout this time of year. And then they eventually will then go on to compete at a national competition in the summer. And so my oldest daughter is now 11, and over the past year, maybe even past 2 years, I've kind of slowly introduced her to the idea of just concepts of mobility and concepts of strength training, and how certain plyometric exercises might be beneficial to her capabilities. And as she started doing those things, I also started having conversations with the local studio owner and their company director about, I would love to provide this to the company in general. We're think of us as a team, right? It's like she has her solo work and things that she does, but ultimately there's a lot of group dances where it really bests the entire group if they're all at optimal performance level. And so really was once they gave their blessing to do that, I started doing strength and conditioning programs with them. And the things that I am going to speak at in the NSCA National Conference is really just kind of a reflection on what I've gathered from a research standpoint, what I've gathered from my practical experience working with these dancers, and kind of trying to get the message out there that there's a very strong chance many of those in attendance at the NSCA conference work in maybe a private or independent setting and are seeking out clientele. I think there is a huge opportunity for people that work in those aspects, that reaching out to their local dance studios and just seeing, is there an opportunity to work with these adolescent dancers and help to optimize them as they prepare for these intense competitions. And so that's really kind of the point of the talk in July, is kind of a labor of love with this experience that I've had strength and conditioning with this studio.
I'm just curious, with this dance studio itself, I'm imagining that there's going to be jazz, tap, hip hop. Is it running the full spectrum of dance, or are they primarily one discipline over another?
Good question. So it is multidisciplinary. They obviously they kind of start out all dancers with the foundation of ballet, and so they take ballet classes. However, at least at this particular studio, they don't compete in ballet. They do a separate ballet recital for all of their ballet classes. For the competitions, they will perform in genres such as tap, jazz, lyrical / contemporary, which is kind of got some strong elements of ballet in there. And our particular studio doesn't have a competitive hip hop dance, but there's a lot of hip hop soloists and groups that you'll see at these events. So yeah, the typical dance company will come to these competitions with multiple dances across multiple disciplines. And so many of our dancers are not just doing jazz pieces, they're also doing a tap number, they're also doing a lyrical number. So they have to have some, at least above average proficiency in all of these types of dances.
I imagine you probably conducted a needs analysis in regards to performance and how to get them to a higher level of competition. So what have you found with the dancers that you home in on, that you want to have into their strength conditioning program?
So it actually started back in the middle stages of the pandemic, which I assume that in your talks that you've had with other people that are doing research and stuff like that, I had an idea for a research project and had a fellow student who had the opportunity to complete a research project for credit. Her background was in dance. And so we kind of collaborated on this idea where kind of looking at various fitness parameters and also having them perform a dance number, and then having a judge, someone who's an independent party, but they're regularly judge at these competitions, give us a score for each of the dancers and see if we maybe found some correlates. Unfortunately, because of how the pandemic works and things like that, we didn't acquire enough data to really, turn it into a publication or anything like that. But there were a couple things that stood out to me. One was the differences that we saw in aerobic conditioning. And there's other research out there that shows that while there are components of aerobic capacity in dance, they don't get a lot of it from dance rehearsals themselves, right? It's a lot of stop and go. It's a lot of finding positionings and marking where you're going to be on the stage. And so they don't get that aerobic response in their training, just in preparation for their dance. And so there is this gap that probably could be filled through some type of conditioning program. The other things that we're seeing were things related to trunk stability, and the fact that really with a lot of the different dance movements, where they're obviously bringing a lot of their forces are coming from the lower body. Ultimately, what maybe decides whether or not they're going to maintain that movement, complete the movement, transition to the next movement, is that trunk strength and stability. And so we maybe saw some discrepancies in FMS measures amongst the dancers. And then lastly, this is just from things that I've gathered, is there's really a huge need for posterior strength, through the glutes and through the hamstrings, and a lot of the expectations on dancers. When you think of what's called turnout, which a lot of people have probably seen, they just don't know what it's called, is when a ballet dancer stands in external rotation of their feet. Usually from that position, they perform certain leg lifts and things like that. There's a lot of dancers that can achieve turnout to a certain extent, and that might be a concept of their flexibility. But as far as can they maintain turnout as they're doing these lifts, that's probably more related to their strength. And so there's a tendency for them to lack enough glute strength to be able to perform some of those movements as expected. And so those really tend to be the three pillars that I try to focus on with the dancers. The thing I also like about working with them, I think it's analogous to working on a 100-piece puzzle versus a 500-piece puzzle, is that there are so many other wrinkles and factors that we have to think about that are independent of the fact that they're dancers. These are largely 11 to 17-year-olds that I'm working with. They're all female. And so you're, really kind of having to understand, like, what is their stage of physical development? What is their, factors related to being a middle school or high school student? And these things kind of have to be taken under consideration. How do they tolerate the physical demand of dancing several days a week? Like I said, they don't really tend to see strong physiological adaptation from their dance rehearsals, but it's still physically demanding. They're still there for hours at a time, a lot of stop and go, and things that could maybe create some repetitive stress. And so those are things that I'm also interested in evaluating and perhaps preventing, is that you're bound to receive some repetitive stress. Is that repetitive stress ideal to the mechanics of our body, or is that repetitive stress, when it is done in maybe an incorrect body position over and over again, is that what's leading to these ankle injuries, these lower back injuries, things like that?
I hear you. So what are your common injury sites for the dancers you're training?
For our particular dancers, I would say number one is foot and ankle. At least from my experience, that's the one that's the most reported from them. Some of them have some hip injuries, but the second place one I would probably say is lumbar, and having some lower back pain. And so those are, like I said, kind of the things that um, it's tricky to be delicate to the ones who have pre-existing injury, making sure that I'm not the cause of a re-injury, but then also trying to find ways for those that have not reported such an injury. Well, let's try to make sure that you never become another one of our statistics on injury rate for that particular site. So like I said, it's for our particular dancers, lower back and ankle. But if you were to look at the statistics with dancers in general, it's probably those two sites, and then in addition, there's probably some hip and knee issues depending on the type of dance that they perform.
So with the dancers that start as the fundamental foundation of ballet, little do most people know, I actually did a little ballet in college because, I somewhat jokingly say there weren't any guys in the class. So, and I'm no dummy, but guys are not trained to go on point, which is, for those that aren't familiar with dance or ballet, that's where you get up onto the tips of your toes and dance. Like just like you might imagine a ballerina spinning on the tips of the toes. But so the dancers in this particular company, are they trained to go on point? And if so, are you noticing any difference in terms of foot and ankle injuries or any other injuries between the two camps that perhaps were on point for those that weren't trained to go on point?
So for our particular dancers, they are invited to participate in point, and I believe what the company tends to do is maybe more based on factors like age range, and thinking, do they have enough, not really the experience, but the strength to be able to go on point. And so that the invitation is usually extended to those maybe more in like the 13 to 14-year-old age range. So you tend to have more of the late middle school, early high school dancers performing that. We don't have enough volume of the different camps to really notice a difference. And the other factor to that is those that are experiencing ankle injuries, you kind of question, is it based on the style of dance they're performing? Is it the fact that we're not seeing it as much in the 9 to 10-year-olds, and we're seeing it more in the older ladies? Is that just again, like a repetitive stress thing, that
Sure.
your way of jumping and landing, your way of transitioning from one movement to the other, is that something that is needs to be introduced to you as a way of maybe trying to do things a little bit differently? Not, I'm certainly not going to instruct them to dance differently, right? It's just more of foundations and mechanics of like landing technique, right? So I might do a traditional depth drop, where I have them start from an elevated position and land on the floor, and we're just practicing landing mechanics, and having them understand how to avoid the valgus stress as they land, which is obviously very common in the female athletic population. And what's the distribution of your weight as you're landing, with both feet simultaneously. We haven't really gotten to the point where we're exploring more advanced things like, single leg landings and stuff like that, but that'll probably come in the summer. This is when I started to work with them, it was as we're kind of getting towards the height of one of their winter recitals and then into competition season. I didn't want anybody blaming me for anything that happened to any of these dancers. So I wanted to be very conservative with some of the exercises that I was doing. But we are going to do a more robust program this summer, which would be kind of considered their off season, of course. And then hopefully that'll continue on into the fall as they
Right
prepare
on.
for the next season.
So you mentioned, of course, the two main common injury sites being low back, foot, ankle. And you also mentioned the FMS, which ideally a good screening process to let individuals know if they're ready for strength conditioning. But with the FMS, it doesn't seem that they address all that much of the foot ankle complex, other than just maybe the hurdle step where you have to balance on top of one foot, maybe the split squat or inline lunge, as it's called, so you can see what it's like. But do you have you developed, or do you use some type of assessment protocol for the foot and ankle, seeing that as a very common injury site?
Not as of yet. It's something wanting to explore. Like I said, kind of what this past year has been is sort of a buy-in period is the way I like to look at it. Is I want the athletes to have, and it's the name of my topic at the conference is dancers as athletes. I want to refer to them as athletes. I want to treat them as athletes. And so I want all athletes to have buy-in to what we're doing. And culturally, like we stated before, the dance community has not really looked at traditional strength and conditioning as something that needs to be done regularly, or needs to be done in the way that you or I have the training and the experience to know like what that looks like, right? There was a time, and I don't want to knock what our studio was doing, but let's just say there was an exercise that we're making my daughter do that I observed at one of her classes and thought to myself, this isn't it. This isn't what would really, help her become a better dancer, help her athletically, help her from a strengthening or stability standpoint. And so that was really the springboard to having conversations. And wouldn't say it was a total mess or anything like that. It was just that one particular exercise that I was like, this feels like something that has been handed down from generation to generation, as this is what we do to prepare ourselves. And, we as a strength and conditioning community know better and would have a different approach. Going back to, the ankle and foot, it's not something that I've truly fully assessed with this group, but would intend to probably at the start of the summer to assess like, okay, where are we at right now? As we introduce this off-season program. One of the things I've often also, you'd mentioned some of the different exercises, but I often look at the ankle from the overhead squat exercise or the FMS, because often if someone, and I only know this because of my own ankle injury history, I am notorious for I've lost count how many times I either sprained or broke a bone in my ankle, both ankles, I should say. And one of the very first times I performed the overhead squat FMS, there was somebody in the class who was observing me, and the very first words out of his mouth was, have you injured your ankle recently or just in the past? And I was like, matter of fact, yeah. One, it was, he said there was maybe a discrepancy in muscle hypertrophy to one or the other, which I would say made a lot of sense because I was immobilized in the one side. But he was noticing the over pronation of my foot, and that I was, kind of going through that external rotation almost to compensate the depth of the squat. And so that's probably that's been one of my go-tos when I've done the FMS, is observing the ankle during that particular movement. I know that's not really the primary reason for performing that FMS movement and what information you're intended to gather from it. But I always found it very fascinating that those with a prior ankle injury history, that compensation that you witness in their feet as they try to perform that squat depth. So that's one particular element. Other than that, I'd be, it would probably be one of my goals of my to-do list as we approach the summer, is to kind of decide how do I want to evaluate that particular part of their body.
Yeah, well said about the overhead squat. Yeah, it definitely gives you an indication to some degree of ankle dorsiflexion, foot function, and so on. So one thing that I will often see with youth that are pursuing a sport competition activity is the tendency in our culture at this given time to turn that individual into a single sport athlete year round. And you and I know the detriments to such an approach, not only mental, emotional burnout that is a very high risk of occurring. So you're taking somebody that has a passion and basically drilling them into the ground to the point where they don't want to do it anymore, which is the antithesis of what you're trying to accomplish, obviously. But with these dancers, how do you offset that? Is there something built in? Because as I see it, there's a summer curriculum, a fall, a winter, and a spring. And parents sign their kids up for these classes all the way through. In the winter, you're getting ready for the Nutcracker. In the spring, you're starting to get into more hip hop, and the weather's getting better. Summertime, there's, even though they're off school and they're playing, they're still doing dance. And you know what I'm saying? How do we offset that?
If I knew the answer to
Come on,
that
man, you know
fully,
the
then
answer. No, give it up.
I would be doing, you would come on my podcast. Let's put it that way. So it is very much a challenge.
And as a dad, hold on, as a
Yeah.
parent, because we're both dads, and I, at one point in time, both my kids were into soccer, and it got to the point where it was becoming year round, and I knew the problem there. And fortunately, the burnout was minimal. They both continued a little bit later in their years, but as a dad who is a strength and conditioning professional, that's a better question. How do you deal with your daughters and their dance kind of year-round curriculum?
So usually what I would try to do is encourage them to do, as many non-dance related activities as possible when they're at home, when they have the day off, when they during the summer. We have a community pool in our neighborhood, and my daughter, my oldest daughter, my youngest, just learned this past summer how to swim proficiently. So I'm excited to see what she does this summer. But my oldest daughter, she would swim laps for fun, right? Just to kind of see, can she hold her breath underwater for the entire duration of the pool? It's not a huge Olympic pool. So, but it was still, that was the challenge to herself. She would, want to go back and forth. She might do races with her friends that were there. And secretly I'm like, okay, do it again. I want to see you do that again. Right. Or, see how long it takes you to get from one end back again. Right. So she's, to her credit, she's treating it as this is fun. This is me swimming and doing all these things. But me secretly, I love seeing her have fun, but it's secretly like, okay, this is a form of cross training. This is a form of maintaining physical condition without necessarily tapping into some of the elements of dance. And so anytime she gets a chance to do that, we have a large mat that they got for Christmas that they use to perform stretches and tumbling activities and things like that. And I do cringe a little bit when they perform them on, say, off days. Like they go up there and that's the thing that they like to do. And I'm like, I understand, right? And I know it's not, you know, as regimented as you might do in a dance class where they're telling you to do this and then to perform this and maybe perform it repetitively, that it's on your own volition. But, you know, I do try to explain to them that, hey, you did a lot of this earlier this afternoon, or you did a lot of this yesterday. Let's treat this as your rest day. Let's treat this as a rest period. When they're thinking, you know, when they're looking for activities to do, I might, you know, might take every effort of energy I have that day because of work that, that I had to do. But we also have access to a tennis court down at the top of our neighborhood. It's not much, but it's there, right? And I might say, hey, let's go for a walk and let's hit some tennis balls, right? And so I think it's, as a parent is trying to manage, you know, I want them to maintain physical activity. I want them to stay engaged. I don't want it to be complete laying around and doing nothing on those days. So if I can facilitate that in any way, then do so. And I think it's interesting you bring that up because that's, I think, what I don't know if I would fully get that buy-in from any dance studio for that matter, right? This is just how they prepare from season to season. But I think to get out in front of the parents and telling them, you know, here's what ideally your sons and daughters are doing on their days off. Here's ideally what they're doing maybe in the summer and winter breaks where they have at least a few weeks off from dance. Here's what they could be doing. Will we ever, you know, get to the point where dance is, you know, 4 months out of the year? Absolutely not. I highly doubt that. But we do the best we can with the time that's afforded during that
Yeah,
calendar year.
that makes good. I love your answer. My go-to with the parents when it comes to them bringing in their kids that are the year-round athletes, and I say it to the athlete themselves. You know, all professional athletes, whether it's the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball, they all have off seasons.
Mhm.
They all have a time to stop and recharge, and that's what keeps them going. So hopefully they hear it to some degree. And then I ask them, when is your off season? And they usually pause and then they kind of smile and say, I don't have one. I'm
Right.
like, okay, well, you may want to consider it. Now, to your point, water sports, water activities, that was my idea, my go-to when I'm thinking what would be a good kind of supplement or off-season cross conditioning for dancers. You've got weightlessness, you've got three dimensionality, especially with like synchronized swimming or
Mhm.
platform springboard diving, provided there's opportunity in their area for that. And whether it's indoors or outdoors and the weather is permitting it, perhaps summertime or whatever, swimming, fantastic. And I guess second to that might be track and field. If
Mhm.
they could in the springtime maybe get into that, because I mean, track and field, it's the fundamental foundation for all human movement as far as I'm concerned. But I can't believe this is we're almost near the end of time, Josh. You have just been just peppering me with a whole bunch of great insight and information. Let's give the listening audience a little bit more understanding of where you are, and if you're on social media, how can they follow you? How can they connect with you if you're willing to answer questions off the air and so on to others?
Yeah, so I have a Instagram and Twitter account. The Instagram is Josh Dub with 2 B's 82. The Twitter is J Wludyga. My name is a little challenging to spell, but if you look me up on Twitter and LinkedIn and you capture that spelling there, that silent L that's labeled in there. I am kind of touch and go with I blend the professional and personal with my social media accounts. But you will see me a lot of times recently kind of focusing on dancer specific aspects of training and conditioning, anything that I can retweet, anything that I can repost to an Instagram story, anything like that, I think is valuable to spread the word. And like I said, I think there's a lot of us out there that I presented at the Georgia State Clinic this past December, partly because at the time I wasn't sure if I was going to be presenting at the national conference, and I wanted to present. And so I presented on a very similar topic. There's going to be some differences between my state clinic talk and the one in July. But one of the feedback that I got was like, okay, you were a great presenter, but this is kind of a niche topic, right? And I get it. You know, there's not as much generality compared to some of the other topics that you might get at the national conference, where no matter who you work with, I can apply this to my athletes, to my clientele. But like I said from the beginning, I think there is a huge opportunity, especially for those if you're not tied to a specific professional organization or anything like that. Even at the college level, if there's some opportunities to work, if there's a college dance team or the dance majors at that institution, I think there's a huge opportunity for us to use our resources, use our knowledge to influence this dance community and really make it so that it's not just that they optimize their performance, but that they get some management of that burnout, that reduction in risk of injury. That, you know, unfortunately, like that's what took my wife out of dancing was having an injury that required surgery. Many other stories I heard after my talk at the state clinic was that, you know, yes, I know a dancer here or there that, you know, they're presently in physical therapy dealing with their history of injuries that they experienced as a dancer. And so I really think if we can integrate and collaborate with the dance community with our knowledge, I think it would just be huge and it'll blow up.
Well said. And I know you feel the same as I do, that it is quite an honor to be selected to be presenting at the NSCA National Conference this July, because they do receive so many applications. However, they can only select so many. And for the listening audience, again, you can go to nsca.com to register for the event. It's online as well as in person at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas this July 12th to the 15th. And you'll be presenting on Saturday the 15th, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to sitting in the audience with you and learning even more. Josh, I can't thank you enough for all the in the descriptions below the podcast. You'll find ways to contact Josh, and we hope to see you there this July. Josh, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
And there's one more in the books. Thanks for listening to the Zelos podcast. I want to thank Josh for coming on. And do check out NSCA.com. There's going to be a whole bunch of presenters at this year's national conference, July 12th to the 15th at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas. If you can't make it in person, you can sign up online because there's going to be virtual presentations as well. Hope to see you there.